Welcome. I'm gonna stop the sharing now. That's okay with everyone. It's so great to see a lot of people here. So today we'll be discussing a lot of different topics, all surrounding German foreign policy and the life of diplomats and what is diplomacy and many other things. And this debate is hosted by the European Debate Initiative. And we regularly host different discussions with, well, people that we find interesting about topics that are relevant both in European terms and in global politics or whatever is interesting at the moment, human rights, for example, also migration. And today we're delighted to be joined by you, Knut Abraham. So thank you so much for coming. You're a German diplomat.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And welcome to the audience as well. Delighted that you're all here. And maybe Fanny, you will do a short introduction of our guest today.
Yes, well, before going over to our guest speaker, if you have questions during the debate, please feel free to write them in the chat, and then we can go back to them as soon as we open the floor for discussion. So we're looking forward to your questions and engagement as well. Then let's start. So very warm welcome to Knut Abraham. Thank you so much for coming. So you're currently serving as the Deputy Head of Mission in the German Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. And so this is actually a very interesting time since Poland has been in the media a lot in Europe concerning the rule of law, but also EU budget negotiations and rule of law mechanism. Then before you actually went to Warsaw, you worked in the Federal Chancellery of Angela Merkel in Berlin, right. So very close to politics. And there you were the Senior Director and Head of Division for Bilateral Relations with states in Central, Eastern, and Southern Eastern Europe, as well as the Caucasus. So during this time, actually, the war in Ukraine started and we had the refugee crisis. So you were kind of responsible on working on topics concerning Russia and Turkey as well. Right. And previously, so very interesting times. And previously, you were the Consul General and Head of the Legal Department at the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. Then you worked in the Federal Chancellery between 2006 and 2011 as the Deputy Head of Division of Global Affairs, United Nations and Human Rights, and also served in diplomatic positions in the German embassies in Sofia, Helsinki, so Bulgaria, Finland, and Tallinn, Estonia. And you started, if I'm not mistaken, with a law degree at the University of Bonn. Right. Okay. Correct me if anything is wrong.
No, right.
So everybody knows who Knut Abraham is and has an idea of his career, which is very impressive. Then maybe before we start with your life or work as a diplomat, you would like to tell us a bit more about German foreign policy.
Yes, I've seen, so thank you very much for having me, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. And so I have not what you typically should expect from a diplomat, read out speaking notes. And to make it lively and hopefully interesting for you all, I have to, and this is, then we are already right in the life of a diplomat, I have to do a certain disclaimer. And the disclaimer says that I'm speaking this afternoon with you only in my personal capacity. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the German government. So any quotes are mine, and not quotes which are somehow linked to the government. But this is only half the truth. In reality, especially in times of internet and mobile and smartphones, yeah, you always have to watch out how to behave and what you say. And I can do as many disclaimers as I want. If I, for example, to rush into one thing, would declare, and this is conjunctive now, would declare that there might be a chance for German reparations for Poland or so, this will become viral within minutes. And I get a serious problem, even though I did the disclaimer. So it's and you would not like to have you know, a quote brought in to the attention of the government spokesperson or so, saying, what exactly did your deputy head of mission mean when he yesterday said in a discussion with international students from Amsterdam and all over Europe, as I understand, when he said blah 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 on reparations. So it's always kind of touchy. Yeah, I wanted to switch the two topics a little bit and start from a political perspective, so not to get lost in the diplomatic life and the maybe also private aspects of it. Comes to family and moving around and all that. But what defines German foreign policy? And this is, of course, a number one lesson to learn, because it is always defined by geography. My former boss, Otto von Habsburg, when I was working for him at the European Parliament, was always saying that you can immediately say when you enter an office of someone if the conversation might become interesting or not. He said that when you enter an office and you see maps on the walls, it will certainly be an interesting discussion. If there are nice paintings of roses and flowers and I don't know it, it can develop into an interesting discussion. He doubted from experience, and me too. So what we have to look at is Germany's geographical position in Europe, because this defines the challenges for Germany. And I was very happy to talk to you in Copenhagen, because me personally, I'm from the very north of Germany, from Schleswig-Holstein, a region which for centuries belonged to Denmark in a hybrid format, so to say. It was a part of Germany, but ruled by the Danish king. So an interesting point. And for me, one of the really urgent topics in my youth, when I was your age, in the early 90s, was Baltic politics. Baltic politics. So how to improve the security situation, economic situation, blah, blah, in the Baltic Sea region. All right. You cannot think of an issue my friends in Bavaria are less interested in than Baltic Sea policy. They, in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, in the south of Germany, they belong to this very vibrant economic zone to which Switzerland, northern Italy, very important, northern Italy, but all the way through Austria to Hungary. This is one economic, extremely vibrant region. That is where they think and live politically, as we do in the north. I was studying, as you might have seen that, I had been studying in Bonn on the Rhine, a former capital. And to my big surprise, my fellow student friends there were not at all interested in the north, in the east, or in the south. They belong to the Benelux region. So where Amsterdam and other beautiful cities of the Netherlands belong to as well. So they completely live in the West. And my home now, when I'm not in Warsaw, is Brandenburg. And Brandenburg and Berlin and Saxony certainly belong to Central Europe, with a very similar economic history, and I'm talking about communist times, history and challenges as here in Poland, for example. So this is the geographic position of Germany. And this is obvious, I know, but it's important to have that in mind when I now say that the main political idea which is driving Germany, and I think I can speak for all major political movements, is that it is in our national interest to have strong European institutions. Because Germany belongs to all parts of Europe, but we are, of course, and we, especially talking to you from Warsaw, we have the terrible historic experience when Germany was trying to organize Europe in a way which ended in a complete disaster. And so it is in our DNA to define German interests through the European Union. And there, let me just and then I stop with the political introduction. One example, we have, and you, Mrs. Knaus, you were pointing at it already. So we have, let's put it diplomatically, some questions on the state of the rule of law here in Poland. And that has always been my advice in the Chancellery too, when I was working in Berlin. This is very important, but it's not a bilateral question. Yeah, this is a European question. We have agreed on joint European standards when it comes to the rule of law and many other things. And so the European Union is the construction which is so important for Germany and from which we are profiting so much. And we are not naive. We are really not naive. And this is why we, in the real sense of the word, do invest in the European Union. So when it comes to difficult decisions financially, yeah, you can see that very often Germany is ready to give the final push to overcome problems. And this is not that we are naive. It is that Germany, located in the center of Europe, is profiting most. Well, this is a thesis, an idea we can discuss, from the European construction. And so we really think Europe. And this does not exclude difficult questions like Nord Stream 2 or so. I just wanted to start with this political introduction, but I'm of course open to your questions now.
Well, thanks a lot for this great introduction. You touched upon a lot of topics that we want to discuss as well, such as the role of the EU or how foreign politics is actually made. And I mean, if we start with the political side, then maybe let's ask you, could you describe us, or like students, how foreign policy is made in practice? Because of course we all read about the end results, but so yes. What do diplomats play in this whole process, and what are the challenges?
Yeah, of course, we have to differentiate between the job we're doing in Berlin and the job we're doing here in the embassies worldwide. Our main task in Berlin is to assist the political leadership. So this means, in my case, the chancellor for 8 years I've been working for her, to assist her and to prepare her meetings and her statements. All academic background is not needed in this job to develop many new ideas. You need the academic background to understand what you're doing. So, so my job, for example, as head of the unit for Central Europe, was not to create a Minsk III agreement. That would be much too far. Our job was, and is, my colleagues, my successor there, is to enable the Chancellor to do a meeting with the Ukrainian, Russian, and French president in the Normandy format. So this means develop speaking notes, yeah, and develop statements. So there is not a single moment in the life of the Chancellor which has not been prepared by her team, be it internal politics, be it foreign policy. So this is what we do. We prepare the meetings, we prepare the statements so that they can and she can fulfill her or their tasks. Here in the embassies, and I come back to policy making, foreign policy making in Berlin in a moment, just to give you a short idea of how embassies are working. There we have two main challenges. So the one is, of course, reporting. There is not a single policy issue here in Warsaw which is not relevant for Berlin. So when you look at the staff here at the embassy, we almost mirror all aspects of in all positions of the federal government. So we not only have a political, economic, cultural, and public relations department, we have a department for agriculture. We have finances. We have, of course, all security services. We have a position for social issues, because as a neighboring country, and this is the same with the Netherlands, of course, everything what happens here in Poland is relevant for Germany and for Berlin, and vice versa. Everything what is relevant, what is happening in Germany is relevant for Poland. And so one thing is reporting. And the second thing, and this is becoming more and more important, is public diplomacy. And when we met a few minutes before 4 and had our pre-discussion, I mentioned the knowledge of languages. This becomes, and I'm not a very good example in that, but for that, it is simply necessary to speak the language of your host country. Yeah, if not, you are really handicapped. Because we need to explain Germany, and of course we have to do that today, not in a show, but in a, let's say, entertaining way. So you must be able to stand a talk show, for example. And when it comes, and maybe this is a good point to turn a little bit to the everyday aspects of this job. This means that I would say more than 60% of my work, or the work of the staff here in the embassy, is also practical. So how to organize a meeting, how to organize a political salon, how to organize the press conference. And it comes down to you and to me when things are not well prepared. And there are certain lessons from a long life in diplomacy and politics. And the first rule is that the microphone never works, because everyone thinks someone must have been there to check it. The German flag normally hangs in the wrong order. And the worst thing at all is PowerPoint and all internet presentations. They never work. And the impression you give as an embassy when technical things are not really recognized as also important is terrible. So public diplomacy becoming more and more important. But now back to Berlin and policy making in Berlin. And that is, I know you're from many, many countries, and maybe you might add from your experience. It is quite special in Berlin, and this is of course based on our constitution, which gives the head of the government, so the chancellor, only the right to define the guidelines of policies. So there is no way of instructing ministries to do what the Chancellery wants. So part of our job is to coordinate the government work in general and to convince the Foreign Office to proceed with a certain policy. I had never, or even the Chancellor herself, she has no right to call a German minister and give an instruction. Of course, she can dismiss anyone, but the consequences are clear. That will be the end of a coalition. And so our task is to convince and to work together with the ministries. And therefore, everyone in the foreign policy team in the Chancellery is originating from the Foreign Service. Because it's very important, because we are part of the Foreign Service, and after 3-4 years, or 5 or 8, we do return. And there's this checks and balances, not to quote Lenin, on Vertrauen ist gut, Kontrolle ist besser. So when you return from the Chancellery after a certain number of years, you have used your time in the Chancellery to daily hit the foreign ministry. You might imagine what wonderful postings your ministry has reserved for you. So it is a question of give and take. Secondly, I know whom to call and where to call when I need information for my preparation for the Chancellor. And that is, again, very different from, let's say, Paris. When the Élysée Palace is calling the Quai d'Orsay and is asking for an information about, let's say, internal politics in Poland, it is yes, oui. Quite the contrary in Berlin. And this has a lot to do with this coalition governments. When I'm calling from the Chancellery to the Foreign Office and I'm asking for some background information on the human rights situation in Togo, the reaction there in the ministry is not, oh, the Chancellery needs information. Here you are. No, no, no. It's the right, the red alert. What does the Chancellery have in mind in dealing with Togo at this very moment? And to overcome that, and this is a question of confidence, you have this team, and the exchange, the rotation on the job is very good. In Berlin, we do rotate after a couple of years, so you stay fresh and you return back home. And here in the embassies, here in Poland, it is good to leave after 3, 4, 5 years, not to become too deeply rooted in a foreign country, because as you probably all know, diplomats, no matter where they're from, they deal on a relatively high level of contacts within a government. And there is a certain temptation to interfere after years, to interfere into politics of your host country, because you have been living for 5 years and, well, you know the ministers, you know the journalists, everyone, and it is very tempting to be part of the political life in the host country. But this should not be the role of a diplomat. A diplomat is not a politician. He or she is an observer. And secondly, the rotation in the job is important to ensure that you know the country you are originating from. So my first real posting, so Tallinn was still my favorite, very first posting, but it was more an internship. So my first real 3-year posting was to wonderful Bulgaria. It's really a fantastic country. And then I was called back after 3 years to Berlin. And the most astonishing thing in Berlin was not the situation, the political situation or whatever career chances in the ministry. After the first day, I was exhausted and went around the corner there in Berlin Mitte, and I was buying a beer. And they really wanted €4 for this beer. In Bulgaria, I was used to pay around 20 cents or 40 cents for a beer. I'm telling this anecdote just to make clear that you have to know the living conditions in your own country to represent Germany abroad. When you have no idea about Germany, you are not really a credible diplomat for the partners. And I will stop in a moment so that we can move on. But now a private aspect. This rotation is very important, and I back it completely. But this is, of course, one of the exhausting things in a diplomat's life, to move every 3, 4, 5 years. And this is especially the case when, like here with us, you have children. Yeah, we have five children, and well, they are your age. My daughter Caroline, maybe she is somewhere here listening because she is studying in Maastricht. But this is really a challenge. And very frankly, I don't know, Mrs. Knaus, how your experience, but there are, I was studying in Bonn when Bonn was the capital of West Germany. And I had many friends whose parents were diplomats. And there were 3 categories. Yeah, one category profiting a lot from the international experience. Speaking languages, knowing everything about the world, wonderful, very interesting, very nice. A second group, which was simply, in German, I would say normal. Yeah, so like everyone else, like me, coming from the provinces and studying. But a whole third of the Amtskinder, of the children of German diplomats, were a little bit strange. Yeah, first problem, not being able to write in German. Secondly, problems in getting into connection with other people. Yeah, because you see too many in a life, and it's very individual. Yeah, you cannot say that the job is harming children. Oh no, there is 1/3 profiting a lot. But there are these other cases, and so family matters a lot in this profession.
Thank you so much for this great overview. I mean, now we know how German politics works behind the facade in more detail. Also, the comparison with France is quite interesting because it's much less centralized, of course, in Berlin.
Yeah.
And then also your personal anecdotes. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about the main challenges or crises that you faced during your career as a diplomat.
Oh, yeah. It was a good point with the decentralized way Germany, federal. This is, of course, a key thing to understand Germany. And a key thing I'm trying to explain to my Polish audience here. Yeah. So we have one big issue. We have a German Polish friendship treaty from 1991, and we have 30 years now celebrating. And in the treaty, there's of course the German minority mentioned here in Poland, 300,000 people more or less, but also those who are originating from Poland and living in Germany, and they also should be assisted and helped and financed by enjoying Polish lessons and on Polish as a mother tongue. And we still have problems in realizing that and putting that into action, because we have the federal system. There is no competition. There is no competence for the federal government in educational issues in Germany. And what might be, I know you're from many countries, what might be interesting for you is that we even tolerate a certain foreign policy by our Länder, yeah, which are not provinces, they are states. They are states. So every state, of course, has a representation in Brussels, but this is only the beginning. So in a couple of days, hopefully, Corona dependent, I will go to Wrocław in German Breslau, and there we have something like a consulate general of Saxony, of Sachsen, in Lower Silesia. And the other way around, Lower Silesia has a representational office in Dresden. And we have offices like that in Russia, in many places. So it's a very special thing. But okay, coming back to your question, now I have to remember my disclaimer, but I can tell you that being last summer, maybe some of you had seen that or read that, last summer I was officially summoned, einbestellt, by the Polish government. And I had to formally come to the Foreign Office to receive an official Polish position on quote, German interference into the presidential election campaign. That was very special, I have to say. On the other hand, what was really moving me a lot internally, emotionally, was the fate of a German citizen, Jens Söring, who had been, and he is now released on parole, but he had been imprisoned in Virginia in the United States for 34 years for a double murder, which happened in 1984. And according to our standards, without real proof of his participation, 34 years. But that was a motivation to fight and also to go public in a way. So yeah, public diplomacy, but this public diplomacy can also be a little bit harder or harsher from time to time. Certainly the crisis in Ukraine and the point which for me was the worst in these months was the day on which MH17 was shut down. Yeah, 300, and I'm not saying that for a Dutch audience. Yeah, that is simply my memory of it. And the recorded words of the Russian commanders there, and the complete denial of any interference by these groups and Moscow too. And I do not recommend that. And I think in Europe there are certain standards of filtering pictures, but not so in the United States. So when you check on MH17, you see pictures you better should not see, and that was one of the worst days. Of course, there are times here in Poland. Wonderful. Can maybe later explain why. But working in Berlin has some frustrations included, and this is something I know you are interested in, and this is the situation on EU enlargement when it comes to Western Balkans, for example, and of course the very difficult situation on migration. But personally spoken, these 20-something years were superb. I've profited a lot, but nevertheless, I think you have not mentioned it. Maybe someone of you have checked me on the internet. So I'm doing an election campaign in Germany, and I'm not trying to convince you of the Christian Democratic Union for which I'm running, but it is attractive for me, and it's attracting me to do politics not only from the observer's point and from an advisor's point, but especially in this crucial time for Germany, when we are at the very end of an era of Angela Merkel. To be part of the parliament is something which makes me leave this wonderful job, and my family is not that enthusiastic because here I didn't mention it because I think it's self-explaining. Within Europe, we are, frankly spoken, and this is not dangerous, we are really well-paid civil servants, enjoying a lot of security in many aspects, and what the government is asking from us is loyalty, and this works. I don't know anyone who is not loyal to the country.
So very varied working areas, you could say, for a diplomat. But you talked a bit about the whole life of being in Poland while being a German diplomat, and then that I was wondering about the German-Polish relationship, the bilateral one.
Oh yeah.
Since you also mentioned the whole EU aspect, but if we jump into the bilateral relationship, the two countries are neighboring countries and have many common interests. And Poland accessed into NATO in 1999, into the EU and into the Schengen area later. So that kind of marked a new phase of German-Polish relations. And for example, in Germany, there's also 750,000 Polish citizens. Yeah. So there's also this cultural relation. So could you maybe talk a bit about what would you describe this bilateral relation like? And are there any points of contention maybe that are worth emphasizing?
Yes. Thank you very much for this excellent question. the relations, and I will be as frank as I can, are two-faced. Yeah, there are, as we say in German, there are two sides of a medal, and there's a sunny and a not so sunny side of a medal. The not so sunny side is the side of the medal where the medal lies on. And so I start with the sunny side, and the sunny side shines brightly. It is really a fantastic success story to start with Poland. This country, which I know from the mid-80s, when I was even younger than you are now, I was part of a students' initiative to bring medicine, but also some, let's say, political information and some technical support to the opposition here in Poland. It was exciting, and we felt like heroes, and in a way, we were, in a way, a little bit. So when I compare Poland of today, I really have to say it is simply great what Poland has achieved. It's a modern, well-functioning, friendly, and open country. Yeah, it's wonderful to live here, and it's very attractive. Yeah, so many artists who once were based in London, moved on to Berlin, are now coming to Warsaw and other places in this country. So this is great, and so is the bilateral relation, in plural. Poland has developed into our fifth biggest trading partner, leaving behind countries like European countries like Italy and non-European countries like Great Britain. That was a provocation. So economic relations, superb. The human exchanges are also fantastic. Civil society contacts, a town twinning, the cooperation between, now I say provinces, between the German states and the Województwa here, the regions in Poland. Fantastic. A lot of, as you say, a lot of joint interests, a lot of common understanding. And again, let me highlight the economic dimension once again. The biggest trading partner for Germany is China. And the volume of the annual trade is around 200 billion, in German Milliarden, 200 billion a euro. Germany, China. But when you take Poland and the Czech Republic together, we are at 220 billion euro in trade. So this is, I have really no figures and no speaking notes here, but this is a figure I remember. Again, on the private level too, there is no other country with more international marriages as German and Poland. And this is frankly important when it comes to language and you mentioning 700,000 Poles. And it's not the classic combination, to put it that way. Also on the government level, yeah. So what I'm doing now, and I have had a difficult discussion yesterday, we are preparing for the next round of government-to-government consultations. This is something we are doing only with the closest allies. So if you ask yourself, what is that? This is a meeting of the two governments, of the two cabinets, of the meeting of the ministers, of all ministries in a joint meeting, and to discuss issues of joint interest. So this works very, very well. On the day-to-day basis, the cooperation is excellent. I call the foreign ministry or any other ministry, and the colleagues are really helpful, and that's fantastic. And I can, so if you have a question on that, I would love to elaborate on that. But there is also the other side. And this has become more complicated with the current Polish government. And there's a certain different understanding of European, us here, the 20 people, we can all agree that we should all stick to European values. European values, very good. But what exactly are these values? I open now really a big discussion, but the modern understanding of European values when it comes to family issues in Brussels and in the West is LGBTI rights. The understanding of family values here in Central Europe is the classic family: father, mother, children. And so this has become complicated. The same rule of law, the so-called reform of the justice system, and all that. But you were asking on the bilateral relations, and they have become, and this is not to quote, please, but they have become bumpy. The problem is a phenomenon which is called here in Poland history policy. And this government here has a certain intention to present Polish history in a certain, of course, positive way. Fine. But they also think, and this is simply not the case, that we in Berlin do the same. And trying to rewrite the German role in the history of the 20th century. And there it becomes really problematic. And in my introduction, I was also already mentioning one word, which is highly explosive. And this is, but it is brought to a certain extent to the table or on the table by the Polish government. Just one example, and this is the question of reparations. This is highly toxic. This is highly toxic, and so just this example, there are really bumpy and difficult aspects of the relationship. But on the other hand, and this session here is about diplomatic life and the challenges for diplomats. This makes this job here in Warsaw so interesting. Yeah, because it's very relevant, and it touches deepest self-understanding, and it's extremely necessary to talk. This is what a diplomat mainly does, talking, and this is why we are all suffering so much from the situation now, in which we can talk, but only as we do today, digitally, via internet. I'll be ending in a second, but there's one thought I would like to mention here when it comes to qualifications of diplomats, and no matter what, from Denmark or Turkey or any other country represented here. The main qualification is not academic. Yeah, the formal qualification is that you need a university diploma. Fine. Yeah, you have to be able to think academically. But in my experience, it is, and this is also how these assessment centers work. The main qualification is that you have to be interested in other people. If you are interested in books, you should stay in science. What makes this job not unique but special is that in 40 years of a normal career, or maybe 35, I don't know, never counted it, you meet thousands of people. And also after, I think in my case, I'm 22 years on the job now, you have to be curious every single day to meet new people. And you have to be really interested in other people, not only giving the impression that you are, sometimes, okay, sometimes, but and this goes on. It is in the morning, for lunch, and in the evening. What the daily experience is, you are confronted daily with, I don't know, maybe 15 or so people you meet, and you should be curious to work with. Now, that was a long way from the German-Polish bilateral relations, but I just thought of it.
No, interesting. I mean, so there's this, in a way, there's the Polish-German relation, bilateral, and then earlier you mentioned something about especially foreign policy being very shaped by EU institutions or the EU level. So I kind of wanted to tie those two things together. So in a way, as I mentioned, foreign policy is also influenced by the EU agenda, but also through other institutions in the United Nations as well, and other organizations. But since you say that the EU plays such a big role, would you say that as a diplomat, how often do you kind of exchange with your peers, diplomat peers in the European Union regarding foreign policy? How is this kind of coordinated?
Oh yeah. Well, again, a brilliant question. So of course we have the EU institutions which have their structure and their schedules. Yeah. So I'm not talking about the Brussels procedures now. They are there, and the colleagues there work daily in the EU integrated institutions like the Commission, or in the Council institutions, which are not politically integrated, where the governments are represented. From the Berlin perspective, which I have a certain experience, I have to confess that there is regular, minimum once a week, consultations with the bigger EU partners. And this is not a discrimination of Malta or Slovenia. By the way, I love both of these countries. This is to make sure that not one big player is on a different path. So it's important, and by the way, Poland is a part of it. I have not mentioned, but this is also reality, the vivid German-French cooperation. In these years, from 2015 summer, when I came back to Berlin from Washington, and it was, of course, on the really heated situation in Eastern Ukraine. And this, I hope, is interesting for you, or maybe you remember it one day and then take it as interesting. I was on the phone with my French counterpart 20 times every day. We were working as one unit. And that was fantastic, even though my French is terrible. But by the way, that's funny, and we have to speak about languages later. Yeah. we were doing that in English. And this is what makes other nations like the Dutch colleagues laugh when German and when the German-Franco partnership is practiced realized in English, in continental English, which is an own language. And so the cooperation with France, especially on Ukraine, but also other questions, very vivid, very important, and very fruitful. On the EU level, here in a diplomatic posting abroad, you have almost weekly EU meetings on the level of heads of mission, or in my case, deputy head of mission. And so there is a lot of consultation. We very often coordinate as EU countries to do a joint démarche, let's say, on the rule of law. Maybe not all partners are with us then, but a lot of them. And so this is everyday practice to do this EU cooperation here. But now, and I hope you notice that I'm quite frank, and again, hoping that this is not going to be distributed too far. I know it's recorded, it's okay. This is the problem with Nord Stream 2. And now I have to be a little bit careful. And the best thing, by the way, another trick from my experience, if you do not want to be quoted as you yourself, you should simply quote press sources. And so press sources, I read, say that Germany's credibility in German engagement in the European foreign policy has suffered seriously by proceeding with this Nord Stream 2 project, which is an economic issue, but of course has political impact, and not coordinate with EU partners. Yeah, there is a lot to discuss about Nord Stream 2, and again, on a personal basis, I have to confess that I've never been a strong supporter of that, and I'm not saying that today on February 4th. So that goes back years, but and this is a difference being a politician or a diplomat. Yeah, I can tell you that I was against it years ago, but this simply doesn't matter. As a politician, I have maybe, or I can fight to have a certain impact publicly on things, but not as a diplomat. And so there are, because that was very, very, as the Americans say, spot on. Yeah, you quoting me saying Germany is so much interested in European blah blah blah, and acting unilaterally when it really counts, when it comes down to German business interests, for example. This is a complaint I hear daily here in Warsaw, minimum 50 times. No, this is exaggerated, but that indeed is a problem.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting that you mentioned this, because Poland, of course, has a very different view of Nord Stream 2 than Germany. I mean, they've been quite opposing the whole project from the start. And you also mentioned the difference between politicians and diplomats, because of course you represent, and you can't maybe say what you believe openly as much as politicians. And maybe this brings me to a final question because we received a lot of questions in the chat.
Good.
I want to give the opportunity to others as well, but maybe a last question: why, or what is your main motivation in going back into politics? Because as you mentioned, you were running for elections for the Bundestag, so the federal parliament. And what is your motivation? What do you think you can achieve as a member of parliament rather than a diplomat?
Well, I discussed that yesterday with a colleague here, a colleague of mine with whom I had lunch under Corona rules or something like that. And he was asking me exactly the same question. And so I'm prepared now. It's not for vanity or so. It is really to, I'm look at my CV, I'm coming from a very political approach. So in my youth, but this is, you know, for you, this is like grandpa is telling stories from the war. In my youth, Germany was divided, and me and my friends, we never accepted that. So, and we became political, not in the party sense, but very political, because we did not accept the partition of Germany and Europe. That led to these activities here in Poland as well. Yeah, so it is so. And when you go back 3 years, 4 years, there was a remarkable Munich Security Conference with our then Federal President Gauck and our then Foreign Minister Steinmeier. And they both said, and it was to the Chancellor too, and Mrs. von der Leyen when she was Defense Minister, Germany must and is ready to take more responsibility in the field of security policy in Europe. Fine. What has happened since then? And now I'm speaking as a politician, for those who would like to quote, not as a government representative. Not much has happened. And as a politician, I can openly and loudly say, but this is a provocation now, we need a German aircraft carrier. This is, by the way, nonsense. We don't need a German aircraft carrier. But to give really an impetus, yeah, this is what makes politics attractive. And I not only think that, it is simply the truth that the Merkel era comes to an end. No one knows what will come. There will certainly a new foreign policy team around the next chancellor, who is probably, hopefully, Armin Laschet. Again, this is a political statement, not a government statement. But we will see. And so there are many opportunities, and it's for me attractive to, very, very frankly, next posting is of course the ambassadorial posting in a medium-sized embassy. And of course, I don't know from which countries you are all from, but let's go back to Copenhagen. This is of course, as someone from Schleswig-Holstein, one of the favorite postings I have. But on the other hand, what do I do in Copenhagen? Yeah, and now I have the chance and I'm 55, so there will not be too many more chances to switch sides. And the very, very convenient situation for a German civil servant is I can always return. And so we'll see. So I'm really relaxed. When it works, and if it works, fine. And if not, I love my job here in Warsaw and continue in Copenhagen.
Well, then definitely good luck with your election campaigning during COVID times.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yes, but I mean, we all know that it will be an interesting time, or nobody really knows what will happen once Merkel is gone, because it has been quite a defining era. And yeah, I mean, if you want to talk a bit more about your experiences with her, I'm sure that's also interesting for the audience.
For talking about what?
Your experience with, or like how you consider Merkel's period or political career, how you look at that era and what you think will come next.
Yeah, well, this is a
It's a political question.
let me be very brief. I think when you ask, not me, but the German population, so to say, in general, people would answer that in general, they feel well governed. It was, and that is for our population very important to have this certain feeling for a professional government, and that is what Angela Merkel stands for. Yeah, this is not very exciting. The German population is not looking for, fantastic new political ideas. They want to be well governed. It's boring. And these election campaigns, the last 2, 3, I remember, were extremely boring. Yeah, it was, now I'm speaking German for one sentence. The slogan, yeah, absurd. The slogan, the motto of the last election campaign 4 years ago was, für ein Deutschland, in dem man gut und gerne leben kann. So for a Germany, so vote for us, because we will guarantee a Germany in which you all will live well. This is so boring, but so successful in Germany.
And it's created a lot of stability for Europe as well. So
yeah, of course, that is why. And this is something, by the way, we had to learn. I don't know how many Germans are here in the audience, but this is something we had to learn. And I'm not, and I'm now quoting, and it's a real quote. So when I was posted to Washington, D.C., I was reading, of course, the Washington Post and the New York Times and many other papers. And every day when it came to Germany, the journalists were writing, Germany, the leading power in Europe. And our training at university, but also in the diplomatic school, was exactly to deny that we are the leading power in Europe. Yeah. So when it came to the leading power, so France, not us. And we had to learn to live with that expectation. I don't know whether we are the leading, but we had to learn to deal with this situation and to deal with the expectations. And that was completely different from 1995. Or so.
Well, thanks a lot. And maybe at this point, I'll give the floor to John Michaelis. You also had a question about the assessments or other questions you might have.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to reaffirm Mr. Abraham's notion that if I ask my grandma, my aunts, my mom, and myself to how did Merkel govern over the last 16 years, everybody was like, pretty okay.
Yeah.
That's a remarkable accomplishment to do that over.
You know, for me, and I will quote you, because for me it's funny that you said my grandma, my mother, myself. So this is the experience my children also. They have no idea that it could be a situation with a chancellor not named Merkel.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting for us to see what's coming next.
Right.
But yeah, I myself, I'm very, very interested in the diplomacy job, but I'm very intimidated by the assessment that basically comes before it. I have looked at European diplomacy over the European External Action Service because I feel like it's a bit more approachable. I myself have a psychology and a political science background. Mm-hmm. And if I look at the type of like assessment that is basically required in order to get into German diplomacy, it looks very, very law heavy. And I would almost say like also history heavy. To like if I try to see like what is basically asked for in a German.
Yes. I'm very happy to answer that because it is no longer law study based. History, yeah, but I try to be brief, yeah. And if you have a question, you can come via Francesca Knaus, so that you're German, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. So if you have, if you're interested in more details, we can do it bilaterally. But in general, there are two parts of the assessment center. The first part is a written test. No, I have to start from the very beginning, because that might be interesting for other nations here too. The precondition for becoming a diplomat on the A level, so saying the perspective is to become ambassador one day, the basic precondition is a university diploma. So we do have indeed lawyers, because there is a certain necessity when it comes to international law, for example, and here in the embassies, the consular services, to have a certain number of people familiar with law, so who have studied law. But when you compare with, I don't know, 30 years ago, much less. So what you see is many people, my ambassador, for example, yeah, who came here with this interesting intermediate time in summer when I was running the embassy. He studied biotechnology. We have any kind of technical too. Okay, the majority still are historians, political sciences, and so on. But there are, because this is very much the British way of thinking. And in the whole process of the assessment center, you will be never asked on any specific things from your studies. You only have to show the qualification that you are able to think academically. And the written test is only an instrument to filter out these 150 people out of 1,500 people, which have a chance to present themselves in the oral part of it. And I'm very often asked, what is the best way of preparing for the written exam? And this is wonderful to speak to you this afternoon, because I have a very clear and very correct answer. The best preparation is to read for 10 or so years a good paper. This is the preparation, because the written exam is not about any scientific developments or whatever. It is just to show that you are broadly informed. Yeah, and then of course there are some. You have to write a certain. Wie heißt denn das Aufsatz auf English? The thesis.
Essay.
What?
Essay.
Essay. Thank you. Exactly that. You have to write an essay, and frankly, the content is not really the decisive thing. You should stay within the framework of the Constitution, for example, but you will not be accepted if you are not able to come to a conclusion. You have 1 hour, and you might write the most interesting things about German-Polish relations or whatever. But if you're not able to come to a conclusion in 60 minutes, you're gone. Bye-bye. Yeah. And now this is the second part, and then I stop and we can do it bilaterally. And the second part, the oral part of the whole thing, is again not a test on facts, on your knowledge, but is on your personality. Is this a credible candidate to stay with us for 35 years? And this is, again, I'm not speaking for the Human Resources Department, this is just my personal experiences. And when you have the very high flyers, in plural, I always become skeptic, because I remember one colleague, yeah, who was a brilliant lawyer. And to put a long story, it's a funny story, but to put it very short, when he learned that his first posting is cultural attaché in Honduras, he immediately left. And this is what we want to avoid. So it's not the academic qualification. You can have a medium level exams. You have to go through the written test and then present yourself. And of course there are some introduction, and then I stop, introductory questions like, oh, you did an internship in wherever, Kinshasa, yeah. But by the way, I was reading an article about Ghana this morning. Do you remember what the capital of Ghana is? No one wants to know whether you know that it's Accra or not. They want to bring you into a position, and then it's better if you do not know it. How you to discover how you do respond in a situation you are under pressure. Yeah, and so the second part is oral exams are about the personalities, but you can go via Francesca Knaus or Zoe Nicot, and then we can do that bilaterally.
Thank you so much for your answer. I have a lot more questions, but I will give the floor to somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, John, for your questions. Then we all know a bit more. And then there are so many questions. Wait, what was the name again? Oh yes, Denny, you had some questions, so you can go ahead and ask them if you want.
Well, yeah, she just wrote to me that her audio is not working. I'll try to deliver. And I mean, she asks about China, and I think what position Europe should take towards China. And maybe I'll ask, how should well, I mean, this is about global politics, so I don't know if you want to answer, but this is how should President Biden respond to the rising of China, and then how should Europe position itself between the US and China rivalry?
Well, probably not too much to your surprise. We of course, and I was just together with some CEOs from the Volkswagen company. Yeah, they have 10 production sites here in Poland. 10 production sites in Poland. And we were discussing China too. So it's obvious that, of course, China is for Germany, but all of Europe, an extremely important, biggest trading partner, extremely important market. So this is, of course, the reality. Secondly, it is not our job to govern China. But again, what I said on EU standards is also true for international standards. And there, when it comes to Hong Kong, to the Uyghurs and others, we should be very clear in our position, and I think we are. The problem is that China considers itself that powerful that our influence has been reduced in the last years. I remember. But closer to us here, and this is something which is on my table when I return later on. We should invest in China expertise, China experts. We, by the way, invest. We have to watch out strategically who is investing in what. We have to do a fine, in the both sense of the word, analysis of China's presence in Central Europe, which is, frankly spoken, a complete disappointment. With the only exception of Hungary, all the expectations and hopes for China big investment has not materialized here. And I think we are, when it comes to this Huawei thing, as you can see, I'm not a real expert on that, but the awareness of concerning Chinese strategic investments in security-related areas, that has been on the rise in the last years. Yeah, we have to be vigilant. But I started with intentionally by these economic aspects, and China is not a member of the European Union and will not become a member of the Union very soon. So we have to concentrate on the international standards China has agreed on, and we see that in the case of Russia too, and not accept these explanations as there is a Chinese way of practicing human rights, as well as there's no Russian way of practicing. There is one universal declaration of human rights, and this is international law. But both, yeah. So I'm not speaking as an Amnesty International activist.
Great, thanks a lot for your answer. And then I'll give the floor to Kasper Kenning. You have a question?
Yes, thanks to give me the opportunity to raise the question. I've been considering one fact, like recently in Poland, the state company, the giant petrol giant Orlen, acquired the Passauer Verlagspresse,
yeah.
Very big company with many smaller companies, Zeitschriften.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my question: is there any threats to Polish media pluralism, as you can see, as the embassy can notice?
Yeah, this is a very interesting point, and this is an area which we are following very closely. I hope you're all interested in this important question. No, I do not. We have to differentiate between the different sectors of press and information. Yeah, I am, and this is again personal, and not only personal, but then very much comes to the details. When I do follow public TV, which in fact is state TV, I am worried. I am worried, and there are intentions to be observed to also not only by these formerly German owned by a German company owned papers, but also try to find let's say a solution for the private channel TVN, which is an American investment. So there is a lot of music, as we say in German, in also the Polish-American relations when it comes to that. But your introductory remark for me was the most tempting to use for my answer. It is true, and maybe now to the knowledge of everyone, the state oil company Orlen has bought already 2 years ago the main distribution channel for mass media, Ruch. You know, those of you who know Poland, these are these kiosks, and they are all bankrupt because no one is smoking. Not no one, but not many, and no one is buying papers. So that was a emergency operation. And again, one might ask, and this is the thinking which worries observers, why does the state-owned oil company is buying, I don't know, 40,000 kiosks? And what is worrying me, again, more personal than, because then I have to go to the speaking notes, is the answer the head of the oil company was giving last week in an interview. He was asked whether it makes sense to buy a publishing house which publishes 90 different regional papers. And the answer of this gentleman was, yes, indeed, it makes a lot of sense because we can sell them at our petrol stations. This is crazy, is strange, because you don't have to buy the publishing houses if you want to sell the papers. So this is why many observers consider these operations in plural as an attempt to gain more control by the government over media in different aspects. Yeah. These and there is what I mentioned, the history policy, Geschichtspolitik, and the thinking behind. Yeah. In yesterday's Polish press agencies news overview in the morning, it was said, again on these papers, it was said German-owned papers, as if the German government is behind that former investment of this private publishing house from Passau. Yeah, it's a different thinking. And well, let me again, you know the trick already. Let me quote observers. Yes, there are reasons to be a little bit worried. But when it comes to the freedom of opinion and to express yourselves in Poland, the situation is not as bad as some journalists are writing. But it's certainly worth for everyone to watch the situation.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
And yes, I mean, Poland will for sure still stay on the agenda also in the European media. And then maybe I'll give the last floor question to Ivan, who also has a question regarding Poland specifically.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Good evening. Yeah, I wanted to ask, since yeah, you've already spent some years
in
Poland.
Can you speak up a little?
Oh yeah, sorry. I will try to speak as louder. Since you've been in Poland for several years, and you already said that Poland made a great progress in those 30 years.
Yes.
And it became a modern country. It's sort of also from the perspective of living in Amsterdam, Poland is being very much forgotten, I would say, in its importance. And what the Western sphere is looking at when it comes to Poland is this huge constitutional crisis, protests regarding the abortion laws, and yeah, not willing to commit to green policies of the European Union. So in a way, how to kind of develop this or make a small PR for Poland to convince Western Europe that there is a Poland or this country which matters for the EU, and how to sort of deliver this message.
Yes, thank you very much. I share your concern, and I'm really happy and from the bottom of my heart willing to assist in telling the story of Poland. There are, you're maybe also Polish, I don't know, but there are so many prejudices, yeah. But in both ways, yeah. So when I'll be leaving tomorrow for Germany, and yesterday I had some Polish friends saying, "Oh, watch out! All these migrants in Berlin. It's terrible. It's dangerous." And when I'm in Berlin, my friends say, oh, you have to go back to Warsaw. It's so gray, and Kaczynski, and ooh. Yeah, so the prejudices are on both sides. I think the West has to understand it's not the aim of everyone to become like anyone in Amsterdam, Brussels, or Maastricht. It's nice. And I myself, during my time in the military, I was in the Netherlands, in Brunsum, which is in Zuid-Limburg. I love the Netherlands and Belgium in particular, and Belgish cuisine, as you can see, and wonderful. But when I read some statements of journalists saying, oh, we only have to wait 15 years, and then they will be like we are. And this is the same with my voters back in Brandenburg, in the east of Germany. Yeah, they are wonderful, but they do not want to be like the people in Düsseldorf. And this is something we have to accept. But you were asking very specifically, and I give you a specific answer. My advice is, and this is part of my everyday job here, my advice is for Poland to play an active role in the European Union. And therefore it is, and I'm a little bit too frank probably again, it is not extremely helpful when observers, journalists, write that you are blackmailing the others on financial issues. Yeah, not that helpful. But I have a very specific example where I personally, and I had a meeting yesterday on that. The situation in Belarus is very bad, and we have to find a good and comprehensive answer. So what we need, and comprehensive is one of the most favorite German words. Ja, wir brauchen ein Gesamtkonzept. Super. But it's true. We need a comprehensive as an EU. We need a comprehensive strategy on Belarus. And I call, and I'm now a politician again, I call upon the Polish government, not as a diplomat, but as a politician, to be in the first row to develop that. And now it comes not only for Poland, but for Europe. Yeah, this is something, that is my advice. I was writing an article for the Swedish foundation. Mrs. Knaus knows where our private connection comes from via your father. So I was writing an article on Belarus on that, and calling upon, by the way, Poland and Lithuania to develop such a policy for the Union, together with the European External Action Service and other players. But that would be something Poland is a perfect actor in that field.
Thanks a lot for this really interesting debate with this whole relation to Poland and a lot of difficulties, definitely. But I just want to highlight a few points that I found particularly interesting during this whole debate, and especially something you mentioned in the beginning, that German foreign policy is in a way defined by its geography, being in the center of Europe. And in a way, this is very basic. And when you think about it, it's, well, of course it is, but I hadn't thought of it in that way before. So that was interesting. And then also this whole role of diplomacy, how it's really important for them to know languages, and how to do public diplomacy in your host country. But also this interesting point of that there's a risk of interfering in the internal politics of your host country if you stay for too long, and also kind of distancing yourself from your own country if you stay away too long. So that's also an interesting contradiction in a way. And then, of course, we also touched upon like this whole Germany and Poland bilateral relation, but also the dimension with the EU and how the EU shapes some of Germany's foreign policy. So I think it was interesting to talk about how yeah, how much does the EU decide in a way, and how much is Germany, and how does this differ from the bilateral relation as well, and also something that you mentioned about the Nord Stream 2 debate, that I found it interesting that you said that there's a kind of lack of coordination, and they have acted, or Germany has acted quite unilaterally, and that is in contradiction to how usually business is done, where Germany is kind of trying to get this consensus through the European Union and its partners. So we touched about so many interesting points, and the whole China debate as well. So thank you so much for covering so many aspects, and it was really great questions as well from all of you. Really, really interesting. So thank you so much for joining. And before you all go, we have a next debate, which is coming. So Fanny, you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, before I go on, well, thank you so much for coming, all of you, and Knut Abraham, thanks for the great answers and overview you gave us of both politics and diplomacy. I think it was very insightful, and in a way, we've learned a lot about topics that we generally don't get so much information on from the backside. So yeah, it was great listening to you. And if you have a few words or like general recommendations to students, if you want to end with something.
No, just a final anecdote about staying too long on a posting. I developed a personal criteria when you really should consider leaving the United States. And this is when you seriously consider to buy a plastic Christmas tree. Then you should leave. So with this anecdote, thank you very much for your interest. I leave you to your debate. And if there's any subsequent question on more technical things, because I'm not going to elaborate on international politics in a written way now, but like this a young colleague from Germany, you can go through the two organizers and reach me. All the best, and I quit your meeting now. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Yes. And for all the others, thank you all for coming and for the great, interesting questions. So our next debate will be soon on the 15th of February. And we're inviting the head of the Croatian Central Bank, Boris Vučić, who has been governor of the central bank for a long time now. And we will talk about Croatian politics, monetary union, their wish to join the Eurozone. So if you're interested to shift a bit towards the south, have another interesting perspective from an expert in the field. We really hope to see you there. And do follow us on Facebook if you want to be informed. Then we will post all our events there, and hope to see you soon. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you all. Bye.
For hosting this.